Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really fascinating idea about how our brains work. It's called the Bayesian Brain Hypothesis.
Right. The core idea is basically that our brains are using probability, kind of like Bayesian statistics, to figure things out.
Exactly. So our aim here is to unpack what that actually means, how it might work, and why it's such a big deal for you, the listener, who wants to grasp complex topics efficiently.
And we're drawing on, well, a whole range of research from neuroscience and cognitive science to piece this together.
Okay, so let's get right into it. This Bayesian brain idea.
Yeah.
What's the fundamental concept?
Well, it suggests your brain isn't just like passively soaking up information, it's actually active. It's making predictions, interpreting everything through probabilities.
Constantly asking, how likely is this kind of thing?
Pretty much, yeah.
So instead of just, that's a chair, it's more like, okay, legs, flat surface, backrest.
Yeah.
Yeah, high probability that's a chair.
Precisely. And the real beauty of thinking probabilistically is how it lets the brain handle uncertainty.
Uncertainty. You mean because the world is messy?
Exactly. The world's messy and, our senses aren't perfect cameras or microphones. There's always noise, ambiguity. So dealing in probabilities lets the brain make the best possible guess even when the picture is fuzzy.
Right, okay. And I read something about precision being important here. What's that about?
Yeah, precision is critical. Basically, your brain doesn't treat every bit of information as equally trustworthy.
It weighs things differently.
Exactly. It assigns a sort of confidence score. That's precision. High precision means, okay, this is solid info. Low precision means, take this with a grain of salt.
So like if I glimpse something out of the corner of my eye, that's low precision compared to staring right at it.
Perfect example, yeah. Direct focus, clear conditions, high precision. Fleeting glimpse, maybe dim light, lower precision.
That makes sense. So the brain is constantly assessing, like, how much should I trust this signal?
It is, and this constant evaluation feeds into the next crucial point. The brain is always updating its internal models of the world.
Okay, so it's not static.
Not at all. As new information comes in, the brain revises its probabilities, fine-tunes its understanding. It's like your mental picture of reality is constantly being touched up based on the latest data.
So we sort of get what the brain's thinking in probabilities, but how? How does it actually manage that? Seems incredibly complex.
Yeah, that's the multi-billion-dollar question, really. One really influential idea is something called the free energy principle.
Free energy principle.
Yeah,
thermodynamic.
Yeah. That name's a bit intimidating.
Yeah.
But think of it like this. Your brain hates surprises.
Okay.
It's constantly trying to predict what sensory input it's going to get next. Free energy is basically a measure of how surprised it is when the input doesn't match the prediction.
So prediction error.
Exactly,
Yeah.
prediction error. And the brain's main goal, according to this principle, is to minimize that prediction error, minimize the surprise,
How to do that?
by constantly tweaking its internal models of the world to make better predictions. It's like a scientist constantly refining their theories based on new experiments.
So the brain, as this tireless prediction engine, always guessing, always adjusting.
That's a great way to put it. And this involves this delicate dance between our prior beliefs, what we already think is true, and the new sensory data coming in.
Right. The balance between expectation and reality.
And precision comes back in here again.
Yeah.
It determines how much weight we give to our priors versus the new evidence.
Okay, so if I have a really strong prior belief, say that my friend is always late,
And the sensory evidence is maybe a bit ambiguous, like you think you might have seen them across the street.
my prior belief they're going to be late probably wins out.
Very likely, yeah. But if you get really clear, high precision sensory evidence, like they text you saying, I'm already here, that can override your prior.
Makes total sense. Okay, so that's the free energy idea. Is that the only game in town for how the brain might do this?
Not entirely. There's another really interesting idea. The Bayesian sampler.
Sampler. Like taking samples.
Kind of, yeah. Instead of doing these complex, maybe mathematically intense probability calculations for everything.
Which sounds exhausting for neurons.
Right. So the idea is the brain might approximate probabilities by drawing samples. Think of it like running quick mental simulations based on past experiences or memories.
So instead of calculating the odds of rain, my brain flashes through a few memories of similar cloudy days and whether it rained.
That's the basic intuition, yeah. And what's cool is if the brain only draws a few samples, which seems plausible.
Because it has to be fast.
Exactly. That could actually explain some of the common mental shortcuts or heuristics and biases we see in human thinking.
How so?
Well, if you only sample a few possibilities, maybe just the most recent or vivid ones, you might overestimate their probability. It could lead to jumping to conclusions.
Ah, like the availability heuristic.
Yeah.
We judge things as more likely if they come to mind easily. Sampling could be the mechanism.
That's one connection researchers are exploring, yeah. It could link this seemingly rational Bayesian framework to our sometimes less than rational behavior?
Okay, that's clever. But hang on, are we saying the brain is doing Bayesian math, like explicitly calculating key A, B, and all that, or just acting like it is?
That is a huge point of debate. It's really not clear.
Okay.
Some researchers take what's called an instrumentalist view. They say, look, these Bayesian models are incredibly good at predicting behavior, predicting how we perceive things. They're super useful tools, but we don't necessarily have the smoking gun evidence that neurons are literally implementing Bayes' theorem step by step. The brain might be using other biological tricks that end up looking Bayesian from the outside.
So it walks like a Bayesian duck, quacks like a Bayesian duck, but we haven't checked its DNA.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah. The models work well to describe the what, but the how at the neural level is still murky.
Right. Okay, so we've got the core idea, some thoughts on the how. What about the implications? Where does this Bayesian brain idea actually take us? How far does it reach?
Oh, it's incredibly wide-ranging. It really touches almost everything the brain does.
Like, give me some examples.
Okay, well, perception is a huge one. Bayesian models help explain how we make sense of ambiguous sights and sounds, how we combine info from different senses.
Like figuring out where a sound is coming from using both ears.
Exactly. Or deciding what an object is when it's partially hidden. Then there's decision-making.
How we choose things.
Yeah. The framework helps understand how we weigh potential rewards and risks, how we balance acting quickly versus being more accurate.
And even just moving our bodies.
Uh-huh. Motor control. It seems our brain constantly predicts the sensory feedback from our movements, like how your hand should feel when it touches a cup, and uses any mismatch, any prediction error to adjust the movement on the fly.
Wow. Okay, so it's everywhere. What about higher level stuff, like understanding why things happen? Causality.
Yeah, Bayesian causal inference is a big area. The idea is our brain is constantly building and updating a model of cause and effect in the world.
Learning that flipping a switch turns on the light.
Or more complex things, like figuring out which foods make you feel good or bad. It's about observing patterns, seeing what predicts what, and updating our beliefs about those connections. It's fundamental to learning.
Absolutely. And you mentioned brain imaging before. How does Bayes fit in there?
Right, with techniques like multivariate Bayesian analysis or MVB, these are sophisticated statistical methods.
Using Bayesian principles.
Exactly. They let researchers look at distributed patterns of activity across many brain areas at once, rather than just single spots lighting up.
So it's not just this area is active, but this pattern of activity across these areas means X.
Precisely. It allows for decoding brain states, figuring out what kind of information the brain is representing based on these complex fMRI patterns. It gives a much richer view of brain function.
Okay, that's powerful. And what about when things go wrong? Like in neuropsychological conditions?
This is another really thought-provoking area.
Yeah.
The idea of false inferences or Bayes optimal pathology.
Bayes optimal pathology. Sounds
Yeah.
contradictory.
It does, right? But the idea is maybe some disorders aren't caused by the brain's machinery being fundamentally broken, but rather by the brain reasoning perfectly normally according to Bayesian rules, just starting from skewed or unusual prior beliefs.
So the process is okay, but the starting assumptions are off. Like someone with paranoia having a strong prior belief that people are hostile.
Exactly. Their brain might then interpret ambiguous social cues as confirming that hostility, even if someone else wouldn't see it that way. It's processing the evidence optimally given that faulty prior.
Wow. That could really change how we think about conditions like anxiety or psychosis, couldn't it?
It could offer a new framework, yeah, focusing on those prior beliefs as potential targets.
And then there are those really strange perceptual things like phantom limbs or tinnitus, the ringing in the ears.
Right. The Bayesian Brain hypothesis offers a compelling explanation here, too.
How?
It links back to prediction error and uncertainty. If the brain expects sensory input from a limb, but it's not there,
Because the limb is missing.
there's a massive prediction error. Huge uncertainty. The brain might try to explain away this error by generating a perception, the phantom limb sensation, based on its strong prior expectation that the limb should be there.
So it fills in the gap with its own prediction.
Kind of, yeah. It generates a perception to make sense of the conflicting state, the expectation versus the lack of input. Same idea could apply to tinnitus. The brain might generate a sound perception if auditory input is degraded or uncertain. It's trying to minimize that free energy, that surprise.
That is genuinely mind-bending. The brain creating sensations out of expectation.
Mm.
Okay, so this framework seems incredibly powerful, very explanatory.
Yeah.
But what are the catches? What are the big challenges looking ahead?
Well, the biggest one we touched on earlier is really bridging that gap.
The gap between the computational theory and the biology.
Exactly, between the Bayesian description
Yeah.
and the how actual networks of neurons physically implement these computations. That's the hard part.
We can make models that act Bayesian, but proving neurons are Bayesian calculators.
Or Bayesian samplers, or whatever the mechanism might be, proving that biologically is tough. We need more evidence linking specific neural activity patterns to specific aspects of Bayesian inference.
So future research needs to connect the dots, from behavior down to synapses.
Pretty much. Refining the computational models, like the free energy principle, to make them more testable at the neural level, and developing better ways to measure and analyze brain activity while people are doing tasks that involve uncertainty and belief updating.
And making concrete predictions is key, right?
Absolutely. The value of these models ultimately rests on their ability to make specific, falsifiable predictions, not just about behavior, but about the underlying neural signals, too.
And what about that sampling idea? Does that need more work?
Definitely. It's a really appealing idea, especially for explaining biases, but we need more research to really pin down if and how the brain uses sampling, and how that connects mechanistically to things like availability bias or confirmation bias.
So still lots to figure out.
Oh, for sure. It's a very active field.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. If you had to give our listeners the main takeaway from this deep dive on the Bayesian brain, what would it be?
I'd say the core message is that this hypothesis provides a really compelling, unified way to think about what the brain does. It sees the brain as fundamentally predictive, using probabilities to deal with an uncertain world.
Constantly updating its best guess based on prior knowledge and new evidence.
Exactly. It's an active, dynamic process of inference.
And it's not just a niche theory, it has implications across the board, from basic perception and action right up to complex cognition and even understanding mental health conditions.
Right. It offers a potentially unifying lens through which we can view a huge range of brain functions and dysfunctions.
So here's something for you, our listener, to chew on. Think about this idea of your brain as a prediction machine, always weighing probabilities. How might that subconscious statistical reasoning affect how you interpret information, how you make decisions day to day?
Yeah, is your brain this hidden statistician? And maybe more importantly, what happens when those powerful prior beliefs you hold, the assumptions you operate on, turn out to be wrong? How does your prediction machine handle that?
Definitely some fascinating food for thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.